Hey class, in this video I'm going to go over typography in CSS. Typography is the style or the look of text. If you're a design major, maybe you've taken MMA 100 or another class where you've learned about typography. If not, we'll learn a little bit of the basics, but I'm not going to talk a ton about sort of how typography works. But we'll look at how to implement it in CSS. And so when we're working with typography in CSS, we're mostly working with different fonts. And so fonts refer to the different styles that we apply to text. And there's sort of different basic types of fonts, and then there's specific fonts. So we can get started. There's a good website for this. So it's similar to we used HTML color codes last time for color. There's a website called CSS Font Stack, which I like to use as sort of a way to look at different types of fonts. So let's go over there before we add our rules. So I'm going to go to CSS Font Stack. And so this will show up hopefully in the first link. And the thing that is nice about this website is it gives you a preview of the sort of built-in default fonts in most web browsers. And so you can use these fonts just by using the font name. You don't have to do anything else. So they're referred to as web-safe fonts. And so there's a few different types of fonts. There is sans serif. This refers to fonts that don't have like the little feet. The main difference between fonts is serif versus sans serif. Serif is things like Times New Roman, like most newspaper fonts or magazine fonts. And it basically means that there's like these little feet on these, the letter form. So for a quick example, if we had like a B in serif, you would see, something like so if a B form is basically like that, that's like a sans serif B. So no serif. Sans means without, but a serif B would have like little feet here. A serif I would kind of look like that, versus a sans serif I would just look like that. So you'll see some examples of this as we look at them, but there's also monospaced fonts. These are sans serif fonts typically, but they have the same space width for every letter. And this is used actually, in our Sublime text. This is a monospaced font, and the thing that is nice about that is all of our text lines up vertically. So even though we're writing different things, these these guys all line up and these all line up. It just makes it easier to read when you're writing code. And then there's fantasy and script, or what you might call display fonts, or fonts that are meant to look kind of decorative. So they're not necessarily good for reading, but they're good for like signs or headings or movie posters, things like that. So the categorization is nice, and the other thing I like about this site is that it shows you the sort of how safe the fonts are for different platforms. So there's very different sort of acceptance or what's the word? Support, sorry, for Windows versus Mac for different fonts. So for some very common fonts like Arial, there's 99.8% on Windows and 98.7% on Mac. So you can be pretty safe if you're using Arial. For more specific fonts, like you can see this avant-garde font is only 1% on Mac and 0% on Windows, so you wouldn't want to use this one. Versus like Futura is 95% Mac, 1% on Windows. So Futura might be good if you think your users are only using Windows, but it's not going to be good for Mac. It also will explain if I try to use Futura and it doesn't work, it may be because you're on a Windows and it's not supported, or vice versa. If I try to use Seago UI and I'm on a Mac, it's not going to work. We're going to look at other ways to add fonts that won't depend on this web safe aspect, but this is just a good thing to kind of review when we start adding fonts. So let's see if we can add a font. And what I want to do is use different fonts for my heading and my text. So for the heading, I want to look kind of more interesting, and for the text, I want it to be a little bit more readable. So why don't we choose a cool fantasy or script, or maybe even monospaced. Maybe monospaced would be kind of fun. So let's do Andale Mono. That's kind of a cool one. So if I want to add this font, I can click on this example, and it'll show me, this kind of like very long version of this. I don't want to do this whole thing. I'm just going to copy the name of the font. So I'm just going to click here to copy. For some reason this is blocked. There's like something. Is that working? I don't know. Whatever. I'm just going to copy the text here. You can also obviously just type it out. And let's go back to our CSS page. And so I could add a font to the body and it'll apply to everything. But what I want to do is have a separate font for my headers and my paragraphs. So instead, I'm going to apply a H1 font. So to apply the general font, I want to use the font family property. And so the value, I'm just going to paste in that Andale Mono. You can also write it in if you want. And that's all I have to do. That is basically, how I add my font property. So let's hope this works, because it's not 100% support, but there we go. So we get that new font for our header. And notice it only applies to the H1. It doesn't apply to the rest of the text. So let's choose a new font to apply to our text. I want something that's more readable. So maybe I'll look through my serif fonts and see if I can find something that looks nice. I'm not really drawn to many of these. Maybe Palatino is kind of nice. I'll probably change this later, but let's just do a P tag for paragraph. We'll say font family is Palatino. I'm going to save that and go back to my page. It looks pretty good. It's not a huge difference from our default. Let's see if I can toggle this on and off. And yeah, I think it's an improvement. I think it's pretty nice, actually. And notice that it also applies to the anchor tag, but that's because the anchor tag is inside of the paragraph, so it's inherited from the paragraph. If I had an anchor on its own or in a different tag, it wouldn't take on that font. Okay, so that's a pretty good start. Let's do some more typography rules. So I'm going to reset this zoom that I've been using. And the text is pretty small on this site. And that might make sense if you are, making a newspaper website or something where you want it to be able to read a lot of text. But I'm making more of like an interactive choose your own adventure story type website. So I want the text to be a lot bigger. And so we can do that by setting the font size. So font family changes the font and the typography. Font size changes the size of the font. And there's a few different ways to do that. So we have to talk about units in order to do this. So what we're going to do, I have my H1 font or header. I'm going to click on this. And we're going to look at some of the rules down here. So I'll drag this out a little bit. So you can see this says font size is 2EM. So what is that? What is an EM? Well, if you've ever heard of an M dash, which you maybe have heard of when in English class or something like that, an M dash is like a little dash that sometimes you see between some text. So you da 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 and then dash and da da da. And what an M dash is it's literally just the width of an M text character when you're doing like traditional typography where you had physical pieces of type. So the width of an M is an M unit, an EM unit. So they call it an M. So 2EM is 2 of this width. But the way that it's applied, and this is a little goofy, the way that it's applied is actually to the height of our text. So it's really a ratio between the width and the height. So if we change that font size, if we do 1EM, we'll see that it's the same size as our paragraph, which is the default for most HTML elements. So if I go in here and I say font size and say 1EM, now they're the same size. And if I do 3EM, now it's even bigger. If I do 4EM, it gets bigger. So EM is a relative unit. So it refers to the size of of the M at whatever the base font size is. So what is our base font size? Well, let's see if we can figure that out. So let's go to our body tag. It doesn't say there. Maybe in our HTML tag. Don't see it there. So let's go to our P tag and see if we can figure it out. So the P tag doesn't have a font size. So what is the font size for the P tag? Well, let's go to this computed tab. This might tell us. So we can go to computed. This shows me the actual font CSS rule, not just the cascading all of the rules. So if I go down here and I look for the font size, it doesn't tell me. It tells me the height. It tells me the width. Okay. Let's go over here. Properties. Oh, I guess it doesn't tell me in here. I thought that it would. But anyway, I'll just tell you. So the default font size on our website is 16 pixels. So one thing that you'll notice is when I set my rules, so let's refresh this again. So H1 is 2EM, so let's remember that. And P is a default 1EM. So if I change the default font size for the whole website, so I'll tell you the default is 16 pixels, and pixels just refers to the actual pixels on the screen. So 16 pixels on your screen. So if I change the font size, if I set it to 16 pixels, we're not going to notice any difference at all because that's already what an EM is. But if I change this to, let's say, 25 pixels, notice they both get bigger, but they get bigger in the same ratio. So this is why we use EM. We can change the overall size of the website, and everything else changes relative to those ratios. So the header is still twice as big as the paragraph text, but they're both bigger because the base unit is larger. And I think that's a good thing to use. So I want my font size to be a little bit bigger than the default because I don't have as much text and I want, people to be able to see it. So 25 is maybe a little too big. It's not so bad. Maybe we'll just do 24, a nice even number. So that base font changes my basic size. But I could go in here and I could change the EM. So I could say font size is 1.5 EM. So this is like 1.5. So it's kind of in between. It's a little too big. Maybe I'll do 1.2 EM. So it's a little bit bigger than the default, but it looks bigger. If I set my paragraph to a pixel font, so an absolute pixel font, like let's say I want it to be 12 pixels. I'm going to make it too small just as an example. Now it's not going to refer to the base font size. So if I go back and I change this font size and I say, oh, 12 is really small, we got to make this bigger. Let's make it 48 pixels. Notice my header got much bigger, but the text stayed the same. So this is why we use these relative weights. You don't have to. You can set them absolutely. But the nice thing about the relative EM rule is it sets it relative, to your overall design. So let's set this back to 24 pixels. And so now we have our header. We'll leave that as 2EM. And now my text is a little bit bigger relative to the header. So I think that's nice. I have this new font, so it's very easy to tell which part is a header and which part is a text. But I want the text to be a little bit bigger and easier to read. So I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to go 1.2 EM. So those are a couple of units. There's actually a bunch of other units that you can use. You can use percentage. You can use the view height and width height. It gets super complicated. But for this example, we're just going to keep it pretty basic. Okay, so we've got two fonts. We could add another font for our links. That might be kind of wild, but we don't want to be too crazy. But I do want to cover one more option that you have. So there's a lot of different services where you can get fonts. One of the easiest ones to use is Google Fonts, and you can get fonts for free and add them to your website pretty easily. So let's review how to do that, and that'll be the last bit for this video. So if I go to fonts.google.com, Google hosts a bunch of free fonts, and it makes it really easy to kind of preview the font, see how it's going to look, and then add them into your web page. So you can type something that you want to preview. So if I wanted to add a font for my link, I could use Animator and Coder. Since those are my two links, I'll see what this is going to look like. And then it'll show me some examples. You can see there's almost 2,000 different fonts, and I can kind of scroll through here and see what looks good. And I can choose different fonts and then put them on my own website. So there's also some filters, which are nice. Like they have more filters than just the basic sans serif versus serif, or although I think you can, yeah, you can say I just want serifs, or you can say I just want sans serifs. There's some interesting like cool color fonts or seasonal fonts. You could do a Halloween font. You can do a feeling. So let's maybe do a feeling. Let's do like maybe a fancy font for our links. So these are kind of like cursive. These are kind of interesting. Let's see if we can get, let's see. Ooh, black letter is kind of cool. Okay, so that's kind of cool. This is a pretty interesting font style, a fancy display font. So if I like this, I can click on Get Font. And there's a little, this is easy to use, but it's a little tricky because you can actually download the font and like put it on your website. We're not going to do that. We're just going to embed it, and it's going to use the Google version of the font. And so it gives you a few options. So the link will add it into HTML. That's fine. You can use it in CSS. That's a perfectly good way to do it. But since it's referring to CSS, I prefer to use the import. So this is for CSS specifically. The one thing that you have to be careful about here is that you do not need these styled HTML tags. If you're putting it just into HTML, you would need this. But since we're putting it directly into CSS, you don't need these style tags. So that will actually break your CSS. So make sure you don't copy that part. So I'm going to select just the import, and there's a little copy code here, but that will add the styles as well. You can't see it because I'm hiding it. So if I do copy code, I'll just show you what this is going to look like, so you won't make this mistake. So if I copy in these style tags, it's not gonna work. It's gonna break the site. See, I've broken the. It's funny that the font still works, but the colors don't. So what I want to do is I want to take out these style tags. Okay. So the other thing is I have to make sure to import the font at the top, so I use it. So it gets used in my before I reference it. So always put any import at the top of your CSS. So then it also shows you how to use it. So you can just copy this line of CSS right here. So I'm just going to copy this. It has a backup system UI font. You don't really need that, but there's no reason not to put it in there. So I'm going to go and put this in my anchor tag. I just want this to be for my anchor tag. Notice one difference here is that it uses quotation marks. That's because it's an imported font, and so it's not allowed to just use the basics. So you just have to use those, but you copy that from Google. And then the other thing that's a little different here is that it has a comma and then it says System UI. This is like a backup font. So you can have backups. Remember we talked about how some fonts aren't supported on some platforms. That gives you a backup to use something in case this font doesn't exist on the platform. So that's actually a good thing to do for these. Like if I wanted a monospace backup for this, and then I would have a serif backup for this one. You don't have to do it, but it's good. So that's all we're going to do for this video. There's only really a few rules here. There's lots more that you can do with typography, of course. You can add underlines and bold and italics and all sorts of stuff. And if you want to do that, go on Google and look up different rules, or go on MDN, or if you want to ask me, we can talk about it. But that's all I'm going to cover for now. You can add a few fonts and update the style of your website. We are going to talk about layout in the next video, so we'll be able to make this look a little bit better. There's not a lot on here, so it's not going to be super complicated, but we'll just go over some of the basics. Anyway, I will see you guys in that video.